Hello and welcome to DSR Daily. I'm David Rothkopf, and I'm joined by Riley Fessler. Our other friend who does this with us, Minna Stein, is away for a couple of days, so we'll try to soldier through on our own. How was your long weekend, Riley?
Pretty good, pretty restful. Happy to be
Excellent.
back.
Well, glad to rest up. I suspect we've got a lot of work to do this week, a lot of news headlines. Why don't you start us off with the one that you think is the top of the news right now?
Hamas fighters tightened their grip in Gaza after a ceasefire by carrying out public executions of men accused of collaborating with Israeli forces, defying Israel's demand that the war cannot end until the group is disarmed. The return of Hamas power and continued flashes of violence underscore the daunting hurdles facing efforts to move U.S. President Trump's ceasefire plan towards a longer-term resolution of the conflict. Difficult elements of the plan, such as establishing an international military force for Gaza and a new governing body, have yet to be negotiated, and Israel remains insistent that Hamas must give up its weapons. While Hamas has deployed workers to clear key routes, promised increases in aid deliveries have not yet materialized for the population facing famine, and the remains of 23 dead hostages remain in the territory.
Yeah, I think this is one of those cases where the news media and some of the politicians involved got ahead of the story. There is no peace deal. There is a proposal for a pathway to peace that has within it, as the experts we discussed this with last week noted, 20 points, two of which have been agreed to, 18 of which have not, and of those 18, most of them look very difficult indeed, like where does Hamas give up its weapons? To whom does Hamas give up its weapons? Who succeeds Hamas in the governance of the Palestinian territories? To what extent is Israel going to honor its side of the agreement? Today, 5 people were killed in Gaza. The Israelis said that they were people who approached them and were themselves in violation of the agreement. Is this ceasefire going to break down like other ceasefires do? I wrote a piece on Substack, on the Need to Know Substack, that we refer you to periodically here, talking about the complexity of the moment and the complexity of the emotions that we all feel in dealing with it. Because, there was joy when you watched the hostages return home to their families. In fact, I wept at some of it. It was very moving. But we know that that's offset by the fact that while 20 hostages returned, 2 million Gazans were returning to utter devastation, unable to find their homes, unable to find relatives, still starving, unsure about the future of their country. We have politicians, congratulating themselves as peacemakers, but we're a long way from peace. Donald Trump, in his remarks to the Knesset over the weekend, made a statement that I found quite troubling, in which he said, the Israelis made really good use of the arms that we sent them. Well, which side of this are we on? Are we on the side supporting war crimes, or are we on the side seeking peace now? Are we on both? Do we know which side we're on? Do we know what's our priority? Where do the other countries involved in this come in? Where will they bend? Where will they push? It's very, very complicated. And I think anybody who watches it is entitled to have conflicting emotions because it's a very complicated situation. What I caution against is getting ahead of the story, is assuming outcomes that are yet to be resolved. That's really, really the crucial factor here, because we're a long way from knowing where this is all going. We'll keep tracking it. We'll keep bringing in experts to provide perspective. But if you didn't listen to our expert perspectives last week, I urge you to do so, because they provide a counterpoint to some of the happy talk you've been hearing on some mainstream media outlets.
Major news organizations, including the New York Times, Associated Press, Reuters, and Newsmax, have announced that they will not sign a Defense Department document outlining new press rules, which threatens the eviction of their reporters from the Pentagon. These outlets argue the new policy, which bars unescorted access and allows the defense secretary to revoke credentials for asking for unauthorized information, is unnecessary, onerous, and undermines the First Amendment's protection of routine news gathering. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's team insists the reporters must acknowledge the policy in writing by Tuesday or lose their access, framing the rules as common sense and necessary for national security.
Yeah, it's outrageous. Nobody should sign this. I do object to Riley's reference to Newsmax as a major news organization, but otherwise, no self-respecting reporter would ever sign these rules. And frankly, quite apart from how it affects reporters, you should be concerned about how it affects Americans, because $1 trillion of our taxes go into the Department of Defense. We ought to know where they're going. We ought to not just simply, be guided by government press releases on what's working and what's not working. The free press is, as has always been the case and was established by the founders in this country, essential to good governance. And obviously, that's what they're afraid of. It's an irony that is not lost on me that, the person who is doing this is the first journalist to be the Secretary of Defense, although I use the term journalist loosely since he comes from Fox News. But he ought to know better. But he's been obsessed since he got there on how he is being covered, on ferreting out leaks, not really on increasing American readiness or addressing next generation threats or overseeing the evolution of the Department of Defense to be a modern force. He has been trying to take it backwards in time in terms of things like DEI, and he has been trying to run it the way fascists run militaries, by shutting down free press access. There is going to be a confrontation on this because I don't think any credible journalist will sign on. And so then the question will be, does the Pentagon follow through? And if it does follow through, what happens next? How do we cover what's happening next? Where does the administration come out on this? This is a big story that's going to evolve this week, so we'll keep an eye on it.
Louisiana Republican leaders are urging the Supreme Court to bar states from considering race when drawing legislative districts, arguing that the need to ensure representation for black voters, the purpose of a key plank of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, is now a thing of the past. The state's legal challenge centers on a recently redrawn congressional map that created 2 majority black districts in a state where 1/3 of the population is black, arguing that drawing a map to ensure those districts violates the Constitution's 14th and 15th Amendments. Civil rights activists and plaintiffs who challenged the original map, which had only 1 black majority district, assert that racial discrimination in Louisiana still exists and that this approach makes a mockery of both the post-Civil War amendments and the Voting Rights Act.
Which it does, but that's the goal. The goal is to make a mockery of those things. The goal is to make it harder for people of color to be represented. The goal is to make it harder for Democrats to win. This is what's called cheating at an election. You think about cheating at an election and you think, well, somebody's going to go and hide some ballots or stuff a ballot box or do something like that. This is exactly the same thing. This is being done in red state after red state as they seek to ensure outcomes that do not reflect the will of the people, that are inconsistent with democracy. And we'll see more of this. And my guess is there'll be cases about this that go to the Supreme Court over the course of this year. And the people trying to put their thumb on the scale will have the Supreme Court's backing because the Roberts Court has been peddling this idea that racism is not an issue in America anymore. Of course it is. Of course we see it every day. We see it institutionalized. And this is more institutionalization of racism in the United States of America.
Several major U.S. airports, including in Las Vegas, Portland, and New York, are refusing to display a video message from Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem that blames Democrats for the ongoing federal government shutdown. Airport operators are declining the Transportation Secretary Administration's request, citing the Hatch Act, which prohibits the use of public assets for political messaging, and their own policies against partisan content. Spokespeople for airports like Portland and Seattle-Tacoma stated that the video's political nature and the fact that it politicizes the impacts of the shutdown violate their commitment to nonpartisan informational public announcements.
As they should. They shouldn't run this. This is a political ad. And Kristi Noem shouldn't be peddling it. She should be trying to use the assets of the U.S. government to advance this political message. But this administration doesn't much care about the Hatch Act. They violated the Hatch Act a lot during the first Trump administration. The Hatch Act is almost never enforced. And it is unlikely to be enforced in this case, except by, public-spirited, minded people who follow the law at airports and other places like this across the country. But again, what we should realize here is that we're not in Kansas anymore, that this is a completely different way of conducting the business of the United States government. Everything is politicized. Everything is weaponized. Everything is okay if it advances the MAGA agenda. And clearly, the way to stop it is for people to stand up like they're doing in this particular case.
1 second. I just realized I accidentally put in the text for the same story twice. Let me find what I meant to put in. Second. All right. A minor MAGA Republican uproar erupted last week over news that the U.S. would host a Qatari pilots and a training facility at the Mountain Home Air Base in Idaho. The controversy was sparked by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's misleading phrasing that the U.S. would be signing a letter of acceptance to build a Qatar Emiri Air Force facility, which far-right critics misinterpreted as establishing a standalone Qatari military base on U.S. soil. Vice President Vance later dismissed the rage as a fake story and misreporting, clarifying that the agreement is a 10-year commitment for a dedicated training facility within an existing U.S. air base. The incident underscores a tension within the GOP's base over the Trump administration's growing relationship with Qatar, which the administration credits for helping him to secure the major Middle East peace deal.
Okay, well, this is something that you're never going to hear here, which is me defending Pete Hegseth. So, enjoy it, savor it, get some popcorn. But, here's the reality. What Riley just described is the case. We have other such agreements with other such countries. We have it with Singapore. We have it with Germany. We train pilots because we sell aircraft to those pilots. And part of the way that you sell aircraft is you help train people in their use. There's another element of this, which, if people are, getting hot and bothered about the idea of sharing space on bases with people from other militaries, and believe me, I'm not embracing the Qataris here. I'm not saying, hey, it's a great idea to be super close with these people, although I'll come to that in a second. We have between 750 and 800 bases in 80 countries around the world. The U.S. does. Having foreign military bases within other countries is not incredibly uncommon, and the number one country for doing that by a lot is us. So I think this needs to be put in some kind of context. As far as the Qataris are concerned, it's a complicated relationship with Donald Trump. That the airplane, which they thought was a good deal, I think was a mistake because I think it colors the whole deal. But the biggest American air base outside the U.S. is, I think, in Qatar. And so, we're already well down the road to cooperation with these people. It is very important to our regional force projection and other plans. And if people want to change that or, change our policies or reevaluate it, I think that's perfectly okay. It's a good discussion to have. If you don't feel these are the right allies, then, explain why and explain why others would be better. But don't misrepresent what's happening as something quite different from what it is. And, I think this clarification helps. Well, Riley, we're on to the week. We have all sorts of podcasts coming ahead. including a couple that are quite special, but I will just tease that. So we hope people will join us at each of our daily podcasts, at each of our regularly scheduled weekly podcasts. And if you like what you hear, indicate it. If you're watching it on YouTube, show that you like it. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you're listening to it as a podcast, subscribe to the podcast. If you think that we're doing good work and you want to spend a couple bucks a month to help support us, go to the DSRnetwork.com, click on membership, and support us as a member. Okay. Hope it's a good week for everybody. See you again here real soon. Bye-bye.